I grew up in a city called Independence, Missouri. Might have mentioned that a couple times, but it was a suburb of Kansas City, about 20 miles east of Kansas City, and had a very old history. But it was when I grew up there, it was almost all white. It was all Anglo, and it was all mostly Protestant. And so there was it was kind of homogenous. It was kind of all the same. And so it was a particular culture. And so I grew up in that, and I had very little contact with anything else outside of it. So as I got older and I grew up, it became more challenging to me when I first started encountering people of other countries and other religions and others, came from different backgrounds, had different cultures and ways of thinking and doing things. It's very challenging to me, and I didn't know what to think or what to do about that. But I was very much kind of fixed in this world of one way of thinking, except for one family that was two doors down from me was a Catholic family, and they were the foreigners in our land. Because, and they were often referred to as those Catholics, or that Catholic family, because it really was a very Protestant, Baptist mostly area, and there's very few Catholics at that time. And so they were talked about in this sort of third-person kind of way. I played with the kids, even though I was warned not to, because they're Catholic. This idea that they were a foreigner in our midst, because we had defined them. We had decided that they were foreigners, that they were somehow different than we were. And we come across that idea. Later when I went into different places, and, especially when I went to seminary was very international. There was a lot of Nigerians, there was a lot of people, Spanish people, there were a lot of people from Vietnam, and all had very, very different backgrounds. People from Africa and Vietnam have very different, cuisines and so forth, and languages and ways of doing things. And so I had to encounter those things. Shamefully, I have to say that I first encountered African American people, I didn't know quite what to say or do, because I'd never engaged with an African American person before that, and it was kind of silly looking back at it now. But my mother had some hesitations. She grew up in Detroit, where they'd had the riots, and she was afraid of African American people. So you start to develop this idea of who is part of our world and who is a foreigner. That whole idea of having that word in our vocabulary means that there's someone outside of our way of doing things. And if you live in a culture, your way of doing things is the right way to do things. You get that idea, that mentality that your way of seeing the world is the right one. And it takes some work and some time before you say, oh, look at all this. I think as I moved down to Houston, one of my things that kind of expanded my cultural understanding was food. I grew up in the Midwest. My mother, we ate meat and potatoes. Every meal would be a starch, some vegetable and some meat, and all not very spicy, very, very bland and simple. So when I moved out into college and then out into the world, I discovered all these different foods. I discovered I love food from the Far East. I love all sorts of cuisines, Korean, Vietnamese, Japanese, Chinese. And I had a couple of opportunities to eat African cuisine, and it was quite good also. And so, through life, I've been able to kind of broaden my perspectives. But I still have situations. I know when I moved here to this area, after a couple months, I said, I'm the whitest person I have seen in the last 3 months. and possibly the tallest. Uh, and I felt like I was a foreigner, I felt like I kind of fell outside of the norm of what it is to live in Kashmir in Fifth Ward. And after a while, I got used to that, and I didn't even think about it anymore. But we had still this idea of what does it feel like for us to feel like a foreigner, okay? Remember the times in your life when you went into a situation where you were different than everybody else, it was a different culture. How did you feel? How did you feel in that situation? You kind of sometimes you feel very nervous, defensive, kind of worried, concerned. You're not sure how you fit into that. What does it feel like to feel like a foreigner? Where is that sense of uncertainty? And on the other hand, why have you been in a group or have you been in a situation where someone comes in, maybe I bring in a priest from a Vietnamese priest to fill in for me one Sunday for some reason, and it's kind of hard to understand what he's saying. Or maybe he's from India and his speech is hard to understand. Maybe doesn't, how do you feel about this person, okay? How do you feel about this person coming into your world, okay? How do you feel about a person who comes in, or a new family in an area that is different than everybody else, Do you just sort of ignore them? That's what we often do, kind of shun them. Maybe if they were more like us, we would go up to them and introduce ourselves. But we would, maybe we would pull back and say, oh, well, hi, welcome, and then move on. How do we integrate these things? And this is a challenge in our lives because we do encounter people all the time of different cultures. And that's a big challenge for us because it's easy, it's comfortable to be with people who talk the way we talk and think the way we think and eat the same things that we eat. It's easy. So to deal with someone who has a different perspective, comes from a different area, can be difficult. Sometimes that's exacerbated. It's made worse when we deal with someone who physically looks different than us. And that can happen in many different ways, in terms of tone of skin or facial structure, or maybe if it's a disabled person. Sometimes we feel very uncomfortable dealing with a disabled person in our midst. We don't know how to treat them and how to deal with them. And they become a foreigner. They become a foreigner in our midst. This was a big question in Israel back in the time of Jesus. And you'll find it in some Jewish groups today, not all, that the notion of being the chosen people makes them very exclusionary to anyone outside of that group, okay? They are God's people, and they have taken that understanding of being chosen. Now, this is just some people. I'm not trying to say all people, Jewish people are like that. Far from it. So, but, you gain that notion of being part of the chosen, being God's special people. And there's positive aspects of that. It is nice to have that sense of belonging. It kind of gives us strength and companionship. But when we become insiders, we unfortunately create a world of outsiders. And in the Jewish world of Jesus, they shunned Gentiles, pagans. They would not eat with them. They would not sit down at table with them. They would walk on the other side of the street to avoid a Samaritan who practiced a religion that was very similar to Judaism. They would not deal with anybody who had touched blood. The story of the Samaritan, Good Samaritan, the Jewish person was bleeding, and so the Jewish people didn't want to make themselves impure by touching blood, and so they walked around. They walked around them. So we create this idea of the foreigner and the outsider. We are chosen. God is a choosing kind of person. God chooses, okay? And that's a truth. But we get it messed up. We get it messed up because, and we look in these stories and we say, Jesus plays a game in the gospel and says, "Oh, I don't talk to those people. They're outside of the chosen people." But he's sort of just playing a game. He's trying to get her riled up, and he's making this exchange. And this idea comes up that she is deserving of a healing because of her faith, not because she's one of the chosen people, not because she's in some category, not because she's from some town, not because she looks like this or looks like that, but she is deserving of that miracle because of her faith, okay? And that will get repeated over and over and over again. He will have people that he's going to heal make some proclamation that they believe that Jesus can heal them, that they have faith that this can be done, okay? It's the faith. He also will say, your faith has healed you. It's your faith. Even in the Old Testament reading today, he says, he talks to the foreigners and says, our house is a house of prayer for all. And it's all who have chosen to follow the commandments and become part of God's kingdom, become part of God's realm. So this notion of choosing. Yes, we come to Jesus, we come to him, we come to his open arms, we come to him accepting us as we are. We come to him and he accepts us. Yeah, then he's going to choose us. You say, I choose you. Could you go and help that person who's lonely and lost and maybe sit with them and talk to them? I'm choosing you for that. I'm choosing you to be a good example in your classroom or your school with your classmates, to be a good example of what it means to be a Christian, to be truthful, honest, helpful, courteous. I'm choosing you to help maybe deal with somebody who's in bad straits and needs a few dollars to get going. Okay, can you do that for me? Can you take care of that for me? I'm choosing you. He's choosing us all the time. We become chosen people. Get ready for what you're going to be chosen for. He's going to be choosing us to give ourselves in some way or another. He's going to choose us to step up. I was chosen to be a priest. I wasn't chosen to be a priest because I'm so handsome, which I am, but I was chosen to be a priest to serve my brothers and sisters. I was chosen to serve the people of God as their priest, to be a representative for them, to do the sacraments for them, to help teach them, help to hold the congregation together, and part to be a leader in the community. I wasn't chosen to honor, for my so that I'm special or better than anybody else. And we are all constantly being called. We're all constantly being chosen. And that's part of what our calling is to say, yes, yeah, I can do that. I can take care of that for you. I can go out of my way and represent Christ in the world. I can do the things that Christ did. I can reach out to people. I can reach down and pull people up. I can give people encouragement when they need it. I can help them when they're lost and when they're lonely. I can go visit them when they're sick. I can go to the funerals and give moral support to the people who are mourning their loss. We are chosen. We are gathered up. And we transform that notion of separation and division and categorizing into an idea of service, of being available to be chosen and to serve.